Everyone, this is Sister Kayla from Emmanuel Lighthouse, Petawawa, Ontario, Canada, and I'm so glad that you are joining us this morning for our daily devotion. How exciting! So I want to talk to you today about the topic of a time to weep. So we're going to talk about crying and shedding tears. Now, for some of you, that might not sound overly appealing, but stay with me. This is really important. I know some people kind of shy away from crying, and maybe that has to do with, during a season of your life, maybe you weren't properly supported while you were crying, or maybe crying is seen as a weakness, or maybe you just don't prefer being vulnerable. But tears are important, and God has enabled human beings to cry for a reason. And I also want to say that if you're a woman and crying is something you try not to do, maybe because you're strong and independent, I'm going to say throw that out the window. And if you're a man and crying is something you will hold back and resist doing because it seems more like a feminine thing, I'm going to say throw that out the window too. Because tears are not a girl thing or a boy thing or a masculine thing or a feminine thing. It's a human thing. And God has allowed the human body to cry for a reason. We live in a fallen world. That means there is death, and there is sin, and there is heartache, and there is pain, and there is suffering, right? And we need ways to heal from that. And tears are part of that process of healing from the struggles and the troubles in our lives, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, or spiritual. Tears help us to find that healing and begin that healing process. So I want to read to you from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I'm going to read verse 1 and verse 4. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Dropping down to verse 4, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So what is the preacher telling us in Ecclesiastes? There is a time to mourn. That's reasonable, and that's okay. And there is a time to weep. There is a time to weep. There is a time to shed tears and to cry it out. And it's okay. In his book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, Charles Darwin comes to the conclusion that tears serve no purpose. There are no reason for them. Of course, I disagree with that. And of course, he was evaluating their purpose from an evolutionary standpoint or point of view. And we have to be careful whether we are Christian or not. It really isn't the point at this time. We must be careful not to adapt this idea that tears serve no purpose and I don't need to cry. Okay? We know that God has created the human body and that every member and every function of the body has a purpose, or it wouldn't work that way. Okay? It is there for a reason, and in some way it's going to serve the body as a whole. And so we're talking about tears. They have a purpose, they have a function, and they do serve the body as a whole. So the body produces 3 types of tears. The first type of tears are the basal tears. Okay, so the tear ducts constantly secrete basal tears, which are protein-rich antibacterial liquid that help to keep the eye moist every time a person blinks. Right? We don't want dry eyes, so the basal tears keep our eyes moist, which is really nice and refreshing. The second type of tears are reflex tears. These tears are triggered by irritants such as wind, smoke, sand, onions. I was cutting an onion the other day. Not a good scene. If somebody walked in, they would have thought, somebody had died because my eyes, I could not stop the tears, but I wasn't sad. It was just an irritant, and my eyes are trying to protect, those tears are trying to protect my eyes from that irritant. And the third type of tear has intrigued scientists and entire civilizations for hundreds of years. And this type of tear is the emotional tears. These types of tears are not produced by physical means or substances or irritants. These types of tears are shed in a response to a range of emotions. And emotional tears are unique only to human beings, and again, I believe there's a reason for that, shedding emotional tears has found to have very positive effects. Sometimes people view shedding tears as negative, but it's not. There's so many positive effects from having a good cry and letting those tears flow. And so I want to talk about some of that. So first and foremost, when we cry, it supports us. It causes others to rally around us. Our tears are a signal that we need support. Okay, so Ad Vingerholtz, a clinical psychologist, has found that people are more empathetic when someone is crying rather than when they're not crying. He discovered that connectedness increases when someone is crying rather than when they're not crying. So crying tends to be more convincing, for some reason, of distress and pain than words can be. So when we cry, it ushers in the support that we need during that season of our life. That's huge. That's important. The second thing tears do are helping to relieve pain, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, pain. Research has found that shedding emotional tears releases oxytocin and endorphins, the feel-good hormones, the feel-good chemicals. That as we cry, those chemicals are released, and they make you literally feel better. They make you feel good, and they help to ease physical and emotional pain. So in this way, crying can help reduce pain and promote a sense of well-being. Okay, biochemist Frey found that emotional tears contain more proteins than non-emotional tears. All right, so the implication was that when an individual cries for emotional reasons, they're actually involved in a healing process. There's a purpose for the emotional tears, and it's about healing something. Emotional tears have also been found to enhance mood. I don't know when the last time you had a good cry is, but all I know is that when I have a good cry, and I may not say any words, but I just cry it out, I often come out of that session of tears feeling light, my mind feels clearer, and I feel not as heavy as I was when I came in. Because crying increases mood, right? Crying lifts people's spirits, believe it or not. Okay. Tears are also a language, and that's a benefit to this, because sometimes there are no words to how we're feeling, the despair in our heart, the confusion in our mind. There are no words to describe those things. But tears act as that communicator, that expression of what we cannot say, that we cannot put into words. And there's a quote, and it's anonymous, and it says this: crying is a way your eyes speak when your mouth can't explain how broken your heart is. So we're talking about the benefits of tears and finding that time to weep. There is a medical condition called dry eye. And so basically this is, these are people who cannot shed tears, whether it's basal reflex or emotional. They do not have the ability. Their eyes don't produce tears. And so there have been found for those people, although it's technically a medical condition, that it affects them mentally and emotionally as well, not just physically. And it's not in a very positive way. These people who cannot cry tears, right, it's been discovered that it negatively affects them, right? They find it hard to respond emotionally, and they find it hard to identify and communicate their emotions. And so whether you actually have this medical condition where you can't cry, it's actually negatively affecting you emotionally. Or whether you're the person who says, I feel like I need to cry, but I'm not letting those tears out, it's going to negatively affect you emotionally, your ability to understand your own emotions, to express your own emotions, to feel those own emotions and be okay with that. Okay, God created us with the ability and the need to shed emotional tears. Okay. And yes, there are some symptoms and disorders that prevent people from shedding those tears, but we've already talked about that it impacts them negatively, holistically. Okay. And yes, gender tends to play a role in one's natural tendency to express emotions through tears. Women just tend to cry more than men. Doesn't mean that men shouldn't cry. Jesus was a man. He wept, right? Culture and country also affects one's tendency to cry. Those who live in poorer countries tend to cry less, though it seems they really should cry more. Those who live in wealthier countries tend to cry more. So culture's thoughts and perception on emotion and tears also affect the individual. There are many who would try to suppress emotional tears, perhaps because they fear it's a sign of weakness or fear vulnerability, or as a mindset that may have been created because they were not properly supported during a time of shedding tears. However, regardless of age, regardless of culture, regardless of gender, regardless of financial status, we all need to have a good cry sometimes. We all need to shed tears. We all need to find a safe place, a safe person to release those emotions and to begin the process of healing. We all have hurts. We've all suffered something painful. And some of us are just keeping it locked up inside, saying, I refuse to let those tears come out. But we're damaging ourselves and we're hurting ourselves very simply because we won't just let the tears come and begin that physical and mental and emotional healing process. There's a form of depression known as the melancholic depression. So this form of depression is very severe and often leaves the individual affected by it, either feeling very deep feelings of sadness for no apparent reason. But often what happens is they go beyond feeling deep sadness or deep anger to where they feel nothing. It's just nothingness. So they're not really feeling sadness or joy. It's just like a blankness, a nothingness. No anger, no peace, just nothing. And because of their inability to feel nothing, they lose their ability to cry. Right? And again, that is damaging to the human mind, spirit, and body. Okay? The English poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning captured this inability to cry in her 1844 poem, Grief. That's what it's called, Grief. She likened grief to this: a silence like death, most like a monumental statue set, in everlasting watch and moveless woe, till itself crumbled to the dust beneath. Touch it, the marble eyelids are not wet. If it could weep, it could arise and go. And so this poem describes those who feel great grief, depression, or nothingness as being like this marble statue described in the poem, hard, unfeeling, with no ability to shed tears. If these people suffering from great sorrow could only weep, the feeling of pains would have to get up and go away. And the individual could also rise up and move on. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was not a scientist nor a psychologist, but as a human being, she was able to comprehend and express that the inability to cry holds people hostage, that it harms them, that it makes them like a marble statue. But she also beautifully expressed that weeping can set those people free. The preacher tells us in Ecclesiastes 3 and 4 that there is a time to weep, and we must be cautious not to allow that time to slip through our hands. If we do, we may become like those hard marble statues in Miss Elizabeth Barrett's poem. Hard, unfeeling, unable to process, identify, relate to our emotions, to others' emotions, unable to rise up from whatever that hurt was and be free. And be free. We get our hearts broken. Families get torn apart. Marriages end. Dreams get crushed. People are abandoned and mistreated. Self-worth is stolen. Tragedy strikes. People die. And it's not okay to always put on your happy face. That is a lie. If you're always putting on your happy face, where is your time to weep, to feel those emotions? If you're always okay, where is your time to weep? Your family or friends or cultures may look down on you for weeping, so you don't. But then again, where is your time to weep, to find healing, to begin that process? If you can't cry because you're a man, then where's your time to weep, to have your pain be healed, right? You're human just like anybody else. You feel pain and heartache too, and you deserve to be supported and comforted too. Where's your time to weep? God has given us the ability to weep to help us heal and be supported during those hard times, those heartaches, those heartbreaks, the pain, the tragedies. So there is a time. There is a time to weep. And so maybe you're feeling like, yeah, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm feeling a little broken. And especially during this time of quarantine, I mean, if someone was to pass away, you can't even go to a funeral or have proper closure. But what you can do is weep. But what you can do is cry it out. But what you can do is pour out your heart to God and let that healing process begin. I don't know, during this time of quarantine, I feel like I've cried more than I have ever. And like, listen, crying isn't always easy for me. So I get those who kind of struggle with that, especially in public. It's like, I don't want people to think I'm sinning or like doing something wrong or there's something the matter or something wrong with me or like I'm weak. But during this time of quarantine, sometimes I cry and I know I'm crying, and sometimes I cry and I don't know why I'm crying. But I know that if I'm crying, it's because I need to. And so I don't want you to be afraid or ashamed to cry. We all have hurts, and some of us more than others. We've seen things we never should have seen. We've endured things we never should have had to endure. But becoming hard like that marble statue, it's just not worth it. So why don't you go ahead and soften your hearts? Why don't you go ahead and let those tears fall? And you know when they're coming. You can feel it. Instead of closing up and hardening up, let the tears fall. It's your time to weep. It's your time to be healed. It's your time to find the emotional support that you need. And God is willing to help you with that. It's your time to weep. So I'm going to encourage you to fight against that instinct in you that says, I will not cry. You're doing yourself an injustice. Tears are beautiful and they're beneficial. And so I hope that this word has blessed you. And I hope that you find all the healing that you need in your mind, your spirit, your soul, and your body. And that you will take this word to heart, and that when you need to cry, you would go ahead and let the tears fall. So thank you again for joining us for daily devotion. I love you all. And I pray God's healing and blessing on all of your lives. In Jesus' name, amen. See you soon.